People talk about compounding like it's some big secret of the rich. They say things like your money makes more money, but most people still don't really get how powerful it is. The truth is, compounding doesn't feel exciting while it's happening. It's slow. It's boring. It's almost invisible. And then one day, boom, it hits you with results that feel unbelievable. People hear the word compounding and think they already understand it. They think it's just money growing on top of money, numbers stacking on numbers. But honestly, the real power of compounding is something most people never actually feel in their lives because it starts off slow, painfully slow. So slow that it almost feels like nothing is happening. And that's the part that separates people who benefit from compounding from the people who give up. Long before it starts working. It's like planting a seed in the ground and then staring at the soil every day wondering why there's no tree yet. You don't see anything happening on the surface, but underneath, quietly, something is building. In the beginning, compounding feels boring, and that's exactly why most people don't stick with it. We live in a world where everyone wants fast results. They want their investments to double overnight. They want their habits to show impact in a week. They want their life to change by tomorrow morning. And when it doesn't happen, they get frustrated. They quit. They try something new. But compounding doesn't work with quitters. It works with people who stay consistent when the results look invisible. That's the secret no one tells you. Let me put it this way. Imagine you start with a tiny amount. Maybe it's money, maybe it's a skill, maybe it's a daily habit. In the beginning, you only see crumbs. You put in the effort, and the result feels too small to matter. You practice a skill for 10 minutes a day, and it feels like you're barely improving. You invest a small amount of money each month, and it feels like you're stuck in slow motion. And here's the crazy part, you're not wrong. It really is slow at first, almost disappointingly slow. And that's exactly where most people make the mistake of thinking nothing is happening. But compounding has a personality of its own. It's not loud. It's not flashy. It doesn't reward impatience. It rewards the person who keeps going even when the scoreboard doesn't move, because what compounding is actually doing in those early days is building the base. It's laying the foundation for a future that won't look small at all. And when it finally takes off, it doesn't ask for permission, it just explodes. Think about a snowball rolling down a hill. At the top, it's tiny. You could hold it in your hand, you roll it a little bit, and it barely changes. But as it keeps rolling, something strange happens. It picks up more snow. It gets heavier. It gets faster, and suddenly the same roll that barely changed anything in the beginning starts adding massive layers in seconds. That's the exact same math behind compounding. The early stage is the hardest because you're rolling the snowball when it's still light. But once it grows, it starts to roll itself. People underestimate this because the early stage doesn't give them dopamine. They want big jumps. They want big results. But compounding doesn't work with big jumps. It works with tiny steps. They keep repeating. The magic happens later, much later. And here's what shocks people. The biggest growth doesn't happen in the first year or the 5th year, even the 10th year. It happens after the point where most people have already quit. That's why compounding feels like a superpower, only for those who stay long enough to see the transformation. What makes compounding even more interesting is how quietly it works. You don't wake up every day feeling richer or smarter or better. Most days feel the same, but one day, usually out of nowhere, you look back and realize you're standing miles away from where you started, and that moment hits you. Because that's when you understand that the slow days, the boring days, the invisible progress that was compounding taking shape. People think success is loud, but most real success is quiet, slow, and almost invisible at first. Compounding teaches you patience, but more importantly, it teaches you faith in small steps. That's the real power behind it. Most people chase big wins because they look exciting. They want the dramatic moments, the huge jumps, the instant success story. It's human nature. We love the idea of a life-changing breakthrough. But the truth is, the things that actually change your life rarely show up in big, loud moments. They show up in the small wins you collect day after day, the ones that feel almost too small to matter. Those tiny daily wins, the ones most people ignore, are the real fuel behind long-term success. They're the small deposits that quietly build into something massive. But because they don't feel exciting, most people never stick with them long enough to see what they can become. It's like going to the gym for the first time. You show up, you work out, you sweat, you push yourself, and the next day you look in the mirror and nothing has changed. You go again the next day and the next, and still nothing dramatic happens. And that's exactly the point where most people quit. They think If I'm not seeing big results, what's the point? But the people who keep going, despite the lack of fireworks, those are the ones who wake up months later shocked at how far they've come. They didn't do anything special. They just showed up consistently while others got bored and walked away. It's the same with investing. Everyone wants the big win, some hot stock that doubles overnight, some crypto that shoots to the moon. But ask anyone who's actually built wealth and they'll tell you that. Same thing, it wasn't the big moves that made the real difference. It was the small, consistent contributions, the small, smart decisions, the habit of adding a little bit, even when the market looked boring. Because the thing about big wins is that they're unpredictable. They depend on luck. But small wins, those depend on discipline. They're much more reliable, and when you stack them day after day, you build something no big win could ever match. Most people underestimate how powerful a small daily improvement can be. If you get just 1% better, every day, just a tiny improvement, you don't end up a little better at the end of the year. You end up 37 times better. That's the power of small wins. They multiply. But because the growth is slow in the beginning, it's easy to assume nothing is happening. And that's why so many people never experience the real power of compounding. They quit before the curve finally bends upward. Think about learning anything new. When you first start, you feel awkward, you make mistakes, you feel slow, you feel behind everyone else. And that's why people give up. They're waiting for some big breakthrough to tell them they're on the right track. But the people who actually become great at something aren't the ones who wait for breakthroughs. They're the ones who stack small moments of progress quietly, without applause. They keep practicing, keep learning, keep improving by small margins. And one day, those little moments connect, and suddenly it feels like a big jump. But it's not a jump, it's a collection of small wins finally revealing what they've been building. The funny thing is, big wins feel good, but they don't last. They fade fast. Small wins don't feel as exciting in the moment, but their impact keeps multiplying long after you've forgotten the effort you put in. They build confidence. They build discipline. They build momentum. And once you have momentum, you become unstoppable. Not because you're doing anything dramatic, but because you're winning small in 100 different ways every single day. The world loves to celebrate overnight success stories, but the people who actually live those stories know the truth. Nothing big happens without hundreds of tiny steps behind it. The unseen effort, the unglamorous repetition, the quiet victories that no one clapped for. That's where real success comes from. And once you start valuing those small daily wins, everything in your life starts to change, because you're no longer chasing the big moment. You're building it piece by piece, day after day. When people hear the word compounding, they instantly think of money. They picture graphs, interest rates, investment accounts rising over time. But the real magic of compounding is so much bigger than money. It's something that shows up in almost every part of life, quietly multiplying. The things you repeat, your skills, your habits, your mindset, your discipline. And what surprises most people is that the things that compound the fastest aren't always dollars. They are the invisible things you do consistently, the small choices you make when nobody's watching. Think about skills for a moment. When you start learning anything, playing an instrument, studying a subject, practicing a sport, you begin at zero. You feel awkward. You feel slow. You make mistakes. The progress you make is tiny, almost too tiny to feel real. But something interesting happens when you keep going. Every practice session makes the next one slightly easier. Every piece of knowledge builds on the last. You don't just add skill, you multiply it. One lesson connects to another. 1 hour of practice improves the next hour of practice. It's skill compounding. And the people who stick with it long enough eventually hit a point where their growth speeds up without them doing anything extra. They cross the invisible line where compounding takes over. Habits work the same way. If you develop just one tiny positive habit, reading 10 minutes a day, walking a little extra, saving a few dollars, writing one paragraph, you won't see a difference tomorrow or maybe even next month. But in a year, in 5 years, that tiny habit has multiplied into something huge. A small healthy habit compounds into better energy, better mood, better confidence. A small financial habit compounds into a safety net. A small learning habit compounds into wisdom. And it happens quietly, without applause, without anyone realizing how those tiny actions created something that looks impossible to people who didn't stick with their own habits. Even your thoughts compound. The way you think today affects the decisions you make tomorrow. If you regularly feed your mind good ideas, good conversations, good information, that clarity multiplies. A small shift in mindset today becomes a major shift in direction years later. On the flip side, negative thinking compounds just as strongly. One doubt becomes a fear, one fear becomes hesitation, hesitation becomes inaction. Before long, the tiny negative thought that seemed harmless becomes a major block in your life. That's compounding too, just in the wrong direction. Discipline might be the strongest example of non-financial compounding. Discipline isn't something you magically wake up with one day. It's built through repetition. Every time you choose to follow through instead of making an excuse, you strengthen that muscle. And the stronger it gets, the easier it becomes to stick to your habits, your goals, your promises to yourself. Your discipline compounds, and suddenly people look at you and think, how are you so consistent? They don't see the tiny decisions you make every day that built that strength. What's interesting is that compounding in money is obvious. You can see the numbers grow. You can open an app and check your balance. But compounding in life, that's invisible. You can't track it day to day. There's no graph showing how much wiser you became this week or how much stronger your mindset grew this month. And because you can't see it, it's easy to underestimate it. But it's there. It's always there, quietly working, as long as you give it something to work with. And that's the part most people miss. They wait for big moments, big opportunities, big breakthroughs, while ignoring the tiny actions they repeat every day. They don't realize that every repeated action compounds, whether it's good or bad. Every time you practice, it compounds. Every time you avoid practicing, that compounds too. Every time you think positively, it compounds. Every time you doubt yourself, that compounds too. Life is always compounding something. The only question is whether you're compounding something that builds you up or something that holds you back. The people who understand this stop obsessing over quick results. They stop demanding instant success. Instead, they focus on giving compounding something to work with every day. One small action, one small habit, one small improvement. They know the magic doesn't happen now. It happens later, when all those tiny things link together and become something far bigger than what they started with. One of the strangest things about real growth is how invisible it feels while it's happening. You could be improving, learning, saving, practicing, building, yet if you look at your life day to day, it feels like nothing is changing. No excitement, no big milestones, no dramatic breakthroughs. And because progress doesn't announce itself, most people assume it isn't happening. They get impatient. They get discouraged. They quit right before things finally start clicking. But the truth is, the biggest changes in your life rarely arrive with a loud bang. They arrive quietly, in the background, after months or years of small steps that didn't look like much at the time. It's like watching a child grow. If you see them every day, you barely notice the difference. But someone who meets them after a year says, wow, you've grown so much. The growth was real slow, steady, invisible to the daily eye, but obvious over time. Human progress works the exact same way. You don't notice yourself getting better because improvement happens in tiny shifts, tiny skills, tiny choices. But someone who hasn't seen you in a while, they'll see a completely different person. The problem is, we're trained to look for instant results. We expect progress to feel dramatic. We expect success to feel like a movie montage where everything changes quickly. So when we try something, saving money, learning a skill, building a habit, and we don't see quick results, we assume it isn't working. But compounding doesn't operate on your schedule. It builds in silence. It builds in the moments when you feel stuck. It builds in the days that feel repetitive. It builds behind the scenes long before you get the satisfaction of visible results. Imagine going to the gym for 30 days. You work out, you sweat, you push yourself, and then you look in the mirror and barely see a difference. Most people think this isn't working, but something is happening, you just can't see it yet. Muscles are repairing, your metabolism is shifting, your endurance is increasing. The changes haven't broken the surface, but they're building underneath. Then one day, maybe months later, someone says, hey, have you been working out? You look good. That's how progress reveals itself, not slowly, but suddenly. After a long, invisible build-up, the same thing happens in learning. You might study a language, practice an instrument, or read about a topic for weeks. Feels like you're not getting it. You feel slow. You feel unfocused. You feel like it's not sticking. But then one day, everything clicks. A sentence makes sense. A song feels smoother. A concept becomes clear. That moment always feels sudden, but it's not. It's the result of dozens of invisible learning sessions finally reaching a tipping point. People often look at others who achieve something and think it happened fast. They think the person got lucky or had some special advantage. But what they don't see is the long period of invisible progress that came before the visible results. They didn't see the night spent practicing, the morning spent learning, the small decisions repeated over and over. All they see is the moment when the results finally became visible. But that moment is just the surface. The real work happened underground. Think of bamboo. For years, nothing seems to happen. You water it, you care for it, and the soil looks unchanged. But beneath the surface, the root system is spreading, strengthening, preparing. Then suddenly, in just a few weeks, it shoots up several feet. People call it incredible growth, but the real growth happened quietly long before anyone could see it. Your progress is like that. Your efforts, your habits, your discipline, they're creating roots. They're forming a foundation. Even if you can't see it, it's happening. And that's why quitting early is so dangerous. People walk away during the invisible stage, right before they reach the point where the results finally show. If you can accept that progress is quiet, slow, and almost invisible at first, your entire approach to growth changes. You stop expecting instant results. You stop doubting yourself every time progress doesn't show. Instead, you trust the process. You trust the compounding. You trust that your effort isn't wasted, even if it feels like nothing is happening. Because something is happening. Always. The work you put in today may not reward you today, but it will reward you eventually. Once all that invisible growth finally pushes through the surface. Consistency is one of those things everyone talks about, but very few people truly understand. Most people think consistency means doing something regularly, but real consistency is bigger than that. It's about showing up even when you're tired, even when you're bored, even when progress feels stuck, even when nothing exciting is happening. And that's exactly why so many people struggle with it. Consistency isn't glamorous. It doesn't give you immediate rewards. It doesn't feel exciting. But it is the one thing that quietly outperforms almost everything else over time. In a world obsessed with speed and quick results, consistency looks slow, it looks weak, it looks unimpressive. But that's only because people can't see what's building underneath. Consistency is like dripping water on a rock. 1 drop does nothing. 10 drops do nothing. 1,000 drops, still nothing. But keep dripping day after day, month after month, and eventually the rock cracks. Not because of the force of 1 drop, but because of the effect of thousands of tiny moments repeated without fail. That's what consistency really is. The bravery to keep going when the world tells you the drops don't matter. Everyone loves to start things. Starting feels good. Starting feels exciting. But excitement fades. Motivation fades. And that's where consistency becomes the deciding factor, because it's the thing that carries you when motivation disappears. Think about anything big you've accomplished in your life. You didn't get there because you felt motivated every day. You got there because you kept going on the days you didn't want to. You kept going on the days when results weren't showing. You kept going on the days when quitting actually felt easier. That's the real muscle behind success. Most people quit too early, not because they lack talent, but because they lack patience. They expect progress to be fast, and when it isn't, they assume something is wrong with them. But nothing is wrong. That's exactly how growth works. It's slow in the beginning. It's uneven. It's invisible. And consistency isn't about being perfect. It's about refusing to let the slow, invisible days convince you that nothing is happening. Those are actually the most important days. Consistency also builds something people underestimate: identity. When you show up every day, even in small ways, you start to see yourself differently. You begin to trust yourself. You begin to realize, I'm someone who follows through. And once that identity is built, it becomes much easier to stay on track. You don't have to negotiate with yourself every morning. You don't have to hype yourself up. You simply follow the identity you've built through repeated action. Consistency creates confidence far more reliably than motivation ever could. What's interesting is how consistency compounds. 1 day of practice doesn't change you, but 100 days, 1,000 days, that consistency builds knowledge, skill, discipline, mental strength, calmness under pressure, all the things people mistake for talent. The guitar player who seems gifted is usually just the one who practiced every day. The person who appears naturally confident is usually just the one who worked on themselves consistently until confidence became normal. The investor with great instincts usually just looked at the market day after day until patterns became obvious. Almost everything people praise as talent is actually consistency in disguise. The problem is people confuse consistency with intensity. They think they need to go all in, work all night, make massive leaps. But that's not consistency. That's a burst. Bursts burn out. Consistency doesn't. Doing a little bit every day is far more effective than doing a lot for a short time. You can't sprint through growth. You can only walk through it step by step. And consistency doesn't care if you're slow. It only cares that you're steady. You don't have to be the smartest, the strongest, the fastest. You just have to keep going when others stop. You have to keep taking steps when others are resting. You have to keep showing up long after the excitement is gone. Because the truth is, consistency isn't about perfection. It's about persistence. It's about being the kind of person who doesn't give up at the first sign of boredom. The slow, steady worker beats the fast, inconsistent sprinter every single time. Consistency might not look powerful in the moment, but give it time, and it becomes unstoppable. Consistency is one of those things everyone talks about, but very few people truly understand. Most people think consistency means doing something regularly, but real consistency is bigger than that. It's about showing up even when you're tired, even when you're bored, even when progress feels stuck, even when nothing exciting is happening. And that's exactly why so many people struggle with it. Consistency isn't glamorous. It doesn't give you immediate rewards. It doesn't feel exciting. But it is the one thing that quietly outperforms almost everything else over time. In a world obsessed with speed and quick results, consistency looks slow. It looks weak. It looks unimpressive. But that's only because people can't see what's building underneath. Consistency is like dripping water on a rock. 1 drop does nothing, 10 drops do nothing, 1,000 drops, still nothing. But keep dripping day after day, month after month, and eventually the rock cracks. Not because of the force of 1 drop, but because of the effect of thousands of tiny moments repeated without fail. That's what consistency really is, the bravery to keep going when the world tells you the drops don't matter. Everyone loves to start things. Starting feels good. Starting feels exciting. But excitement fades. Motivation fades. And that's where consistency becomes the deciding factor, because it's the thing that carries you when motivation disappears. Think about anything big you've accomplished in your life. You didn't get there because you felt motivated every day. You got there because you kept going on the days you didn't want to. You kept going on the days when results weren't showing. You kept going on the days when quitting actually felt easier. That's the real muscle behind success. Most people quit too early, not because they lack talent, but because they lack patience. They expect progress to be fast, and when it isn't, they assume something is wrong with them. But nothing is wrong. That's exactly how growth works. It's slow in the beginning. It's uneven. It's invisible. And consistency isn't about being perfect. It's about refusing to let. The slow, invisible days convince you that nothing is happening. Those are actually the most important days. Consistency also builds something people underestimate: identity. When you show up every day, even in small ways, you start to see yourself differently. You begin to trust yourself. You begin to realize, I'm someone who follows through. And once that identity is built, it becomes much easier to stay on track. You don't have to negotiate with yourself every morning. You don't have to hype yourself up. You simply follow the identity you've built through repeated action. Consistency creates confidence far more reliably than motivation ever could. What's interesting is how consistency compounds. 1 day of practice doesn't change you, but 100 days, 1,000 days, that consistency builds knowledge, skill, discipline, mental strength, calmness under pressure, all the things people mistake for talent. The guitar player who seems gifted is usually just the one who practiced every day. The person who appears naturally confident is usually just the one who worked on themselves consistently until confidence became normal. The investor with great instincts usually just looked at the market day after day until patterns became obvious. Almost everything people praise as talent is actually consistency in disguise. The problem is people confuse consistency with intensity. They think they need to go all in, work all night, make massive leaps. But that's not consistency. That's a burst. Bursts burn out. Consistency doesn't. Doing a little bit every day is far more effective than doing a lot for a short time. You can't sprint through growth. You can only walk through it step by step. And consistency doesn't care if you're slow. It only cares that you're steady. You don't have to be the smartest, the strongest, the fastest. You just have to keep going when others stop. You have to keep taking steps when others are resting. You have to keep showing up long after the excitement is gone. Because the truth is, consistency isn't about perfection. It's about persistence. It's about being the kind of person who doesn't give up at the first sign of boredom. The slow, steady worker beats the fast, inconsistent sprinter every single time. Consistency might not look powerful in the moment, but give it time, and it becomes unstoppable. When people talk about compounding, they focus on patience, time, growth, but there's one part almost everyone overlooks. You can't compound anything without a system. You can't just hope that your money will grow, or that your habits will improve, or that your skills will magically get better. Compounding needs structure. It needs a routine. It needs decisions that repeat themselves automatically. Without a system, everything you're trying to build falls apart the moment life gets busy, stressful, or unpredictable. And that's the reason so many people never experience the real power of compounding. They rely on motivation instead of a system. Here's the problem. Motivation is unreliable. It comes and goes. One day you feel inspired and driven. The next day you feel tired and distracted. A system doesn't care how you feel. It keeps working even on the days you don't feel like working. It removes the emotional decisions. It removes the guesswork. It turns your goals into something automatic instead of something you try your best to stick with. And when something becomes automatic, it becomes consistent. And when it becomes consistent, it starts to compound. Think about investing. People who invest based on emotions, buying when they're excited, selling when they're scared, never see steady growth. But someone with a system, someone who invests the same amount every month, no matter what, someone who follows simple rules and sticks to them, that person doesn't need perfect timing. They don't need to be a genius. They don't need luck. Their system keeps working quietly month after month. And over time, that system compounds into something massive. The same thing happens in life. You want to get in shape? Motivation will get you to the gym once in a while. A system like going every morning at the same time or following a simple routine gets you results. You want to read more. Motivation might help you read a chapter tonight. A system helps you read 100 books in a year. You want to become financially stable? Motivation might help you save money this week. A system like automatically transferring money to savings every month helps you save for a lifetime. Systems protect you from your own excuses. They make it harder to fail and easier to follow through. When you have a system, you don't rely on willpower, which is one of the most unreliable resources in the world. Instead, you rely on structure, which is stable, repeatable, and predictable. And that's exactly what compounding needs. Stability, not drama, not intensity. Just a reliable pattern that repeats long enough to create momentum. What most people don't realize is that systems don't need to be complicated. In fact, simple systems are the most powerful. A small daily routine will beat a complex plan you can't stick with. A simple investment strategy will beat a complicated one that you panic and abandon halfway through. A basic habit you do every day will beat a big ambitious habit that drains you and disappears after a week. Complexity kills consistency. Simplicity fuels compounding. And here's something even more interesting. A system doesn't just give you results, it gives you freedom. People think routines trap them, but in reality, routines free you from the mental weight of making decisions every day. When you have a system, you don't waste energy thinking, should I do this today? Should I skip it? Should I wait until tomorrow? The decision was already made. The system makes the choice for you. And when you cut out the mental noise, you become more focused, more calm, and more disciplined without even trying. Over time, the system becomes part of your identity. You no longer feel like someone who's trying to build a habit. You feel like someone who naturally lives that habit. You don't feel like someone who's trying to invest. You feel like someone who invests as part of who they are. That identity shift is where compounding accelerates. Because once your identity matches your actions, you stop fighting yourself. You stop negotiating with yourself. You stop using energy to push yourself. Everything starts to happen more naturally. The people who win in the long run aren't the ones with the biggest goals or the strongest motivation. They're the ones with the simplest, most reliable systems. The ones who build structure instead of relying on inspiration. The ones who focus on repeating small steps instead of waiting for big moments. A system doesn't guarantee that every day will be perfect, but it guarantees that enough days will be good enough, and that's all compounding ever needed to turn small efforts into massive results. Most people think big success comes from big decisions, big moves, or big opportunities, but in reality, everything meaningful you want in life comes from tiny smart choices repeated over and over. It's funny how we're trained to look for dramatic changes, life-changing breakthroughs, or some magical moment when everything finally clicks. But that's not how real growth works. Real growth comes from the small things, the things that are so easy to do, but also easy not to do. And that's exactly why most people overlook them. They want fireworks. But compounding doesn't work like fireworks. It works like a slow, steady burn that eventually becomes impossible to ignore. Think about the way people try to change their life. They jump into extreme diets, insane workout plans, complicated strategies, or huge lifestyle changes, and they burn out in a week. Why? Because humans aren't built for massive overnight changes. We're built for small behaviors done consistently. If you try to lift 300 pounds on your first day at the gym, you're going to get injured. But if you quietly add a little weight every week, you'll wake up one day able to lift far more than you ever imagined. That's the secret behind compounding, tiny steps that feel small in the moment but become huge over time. Take money, for example. Most people think wealth comes from one big lucky break, a giant stock win, a business that explodes overnight, a lottery moment. But real wealth is built from tiny, smart financial choices, saving a little, investing a little, avoiding a stupid purchase, learning a bit more, being a little more patient. Even something as simple as investing $5 today and $5 tomorrow, repeated consistently, can grow into something meaningful. It doesn't feel powerful today, but that's the trick. Compounding doesn't show off on day one. It shows off after years of small decisions stacking up quietly. The same thing happens with habits. You don't become disciplined by doing something massive once. You become disciplined by doing something small every day until it becomes second nature. Reading 5 pages a day feels like nothing, but read 5 pages a day for a year and you've read multiple books. Practice a skill for 10 minutes a day, and you'll be miles ahead of someone who practices for 2 hours once a month. The small decisions are what build confidence, identity, and momentum. And once momentum starts, everything becomes easier. What's crazy is how these tiny smart decisions build not only results but also self-trust. Every time you make a small good choice, you send a message to yourself: I follow through, I stay consistent, I'm someone who shows up. And that identity compounds too. A person who trusts themselves makes better decisions. A person who keeps promises to themselves builds discipline. And discipline compounds into skills, into opportunities, into stronger habits, into better outcomes. That's why the smallest actions matter. They're not just building results, they're building you. One of the most dangerous lies people tell themselves is this: one time won't matter. Skipping the workout one day seems harmless. Not reading today seems harmless. Spending a little extra money seems harmless. But compounding works in both directions. Small good decisions build you up, and small careless decisions break you down. Missing today is easier than missing tomorrow. And by the time you realize the pattern, the damage has already compounded quietly in the background. That's how goals die, not from huge failures, but from hundreds of tiny, neglected decisions. But here's the beautiful part. Just like negative habits compound downward, positive habits compound upward. You don't need a perfect day. You don't need a huge effort. You just need to show up with a small, smart decision again and again. And the moment you shift your focus from big wins to small, consistent wins, everything becomes lighter. You stop feeling overwhelmed. You stop waiting for motivation. You stop pressuring yourself to change overnight. Suddenly, progress feels doable because you're not trying to conquer the entire mountain. You're just taking the next small step. In the beginning, it feels slow. Nobody notices. You might not even notice. But after weeks, months, and years, the effect becomes undeniable. You look back and realize that every little action, every tiny choice, every small moment of discipline has combined into something powerful. The people who achieve the most aren't the ones who move the fastest. They're the ones who make small, smart decisions long enough for compounding to take over and do the heavy lifting. Most people say they want to be wealthy, wise, successful, or skilled, but deep down they struggle with the biggest requirement of all: patience. Compounding doesn't reward the loud, the impatient, or the easily frustrated. It rewards the quiet ones who keep going long after the excitement fades. It rewards the people who plant seeds and don't dig them up every week to check if anything is growing. And that's where most people fail. They want quick results from a process that was never designed to be quick. They want the final chapter without reading the book. They want the fruit without watering the tree. But compounding is a long game, and only long-term thinkers get to experience its magic. If you think about it, impatience is the reason people jump from one plan to another. They try a habit for a few days, don't see results, and quit. They invest for a short time, hit a little volatility, and panic. They start learning a skill, hit a difficult chapter, and give up. But here's the truth that almost no one wants to hear. Compounding doesn't reward early effort, it rewards consistent effort. That means the biggest results come much later, usually long after most people quit. It's like climbing a hill that seems flat at first. You're walking, and you feel like nothing is changing. Then suddenly the slope turns upward, and everything that felt slow starts accelerating. That moment of acceleration is what impatient people never stay long enough to see. Think about investing. Everyone wants their money to double fast, but the real magic happens in the late years, not the early ones. The biggest growth always happens near the end of the journey when the compounding curve finally starts bending upward. But most people never reach that point. They get discouraged during the flat part of the curve, the silent years where nothing dramatic is happening. They think it's not working, but it is. They're just not giving it enough time. Compounding is like a quiet engine that only roars after thousands of small rotations. That roar never comes if you shut it down early. The same thing applies to personal growth. You won't see a big change after one workout, one book, one practice session, or one disciplined day. You might not see anything after a month. This is where patience becomes your superpower. Every rep, every page, every hour of practice is quietly building a foundation you won't fully see until later. The early stages of growth often feel invisible because the results are happening inside you before they show outside you. You're building discipline, building habits, building resilience, building understanding, and all of that compounds long before the world notices. The people who truly change their lives are the ones who stop chasing instant gratification. They stop looking for shortcuts and start respecting the timeline of real growth. They understand that meaningful success doesn't happen overnight. It happens little by little, day by day. They trust the process even when it's slow. They trust the routine even when it's boring. They trust the small improvements even when they don't look impressive yet. That trust is what separates long-term winners from short-term quitters. And here's the interesting part. Once you embrace patience, compounding becomes easier, almost effortless. You no longer feel anxious about results because you know results are guaranteed if you keep going. You stop getting discouraged by slow progress because you understand slow progress is part of the design. You stop comparing your journey to others because you realize everyone's curve bends at a different time. Patience gives you emotional stability, and emotional stability is a massive advantage in a world where everyone is rushing, stressing, and quitting. Long-term thinking doesn't mean waiting forever without doing the work. It means doing the work without constantly obsessing over when the results will show. It means understanding that the timeline is not your enemy, it's your biggest ally. Time is the multiplier. Time is the amplifier. Time is what turns small efforts into massive outcomes. When you give compounding the time it needs, everything changes. Tiny gains become big wins. Small habits become life-changing routines. Little investments become real wealth. And simple skills become master-level expertise. Most people overestimate what they can do in a week and underestimate what they can do in a year. They expect huge results fast and then get disappointed. But the long-term thinker expects nothing fast and then gets rewarded with everything later. That's the irony of compounding. The less you rush it, the better it works. And once you finally understand that, you stop forcing growth and start allowing it. You stop searching for hacks and start trusting consistency. You stop chasing speed and start chasing longevity. Because the greatest results don't go to the person who starts the fastest, they go to the person who stays the longest. Most people spend their whole lives chasing big leaps. They want sudden success, dramatic transformation, instant results. They want that one breakthrough decision that changes everything overnight. But here's the truth that almost nobody wants to admit. Life doesn't work like that. Wealth doesn't work like that. Growth doesn't work like that. What actually creates massive impact isn't a giant leap, it's the tiny steps you repeat over and over until they pile up into something huge. But because those steps are small, they're easy to underestimate, they're easy to ignore. And that's exactly why most people never reach the life they dream about, because they're waiting for the big moment instead of building the small moments that actually matter. Think about it. You don't suddenly become financially stable. You earn, save, invest, and make hundreds of smaller decisions that gradually build your foundation. You don't suddenly become healthy. You make tiny daily choices about what you eat, how you move, how you rest. You don't suddenly become smart or wise. You learn a little every day. Ask questions, read, listen, reflect. Real success is built from simple, consistent habits repeated long enough to create momentum. And once that momentum kicks in, everything changes. What used to feel difficult suddenly feels natural. What used to feel slow suddenly speeds up. What used to feel impossible suddenly feels obvious. But none of that happens if you're constantly searching for the shortcut instead of actually showing up for the daily steps. Most people fail not because they can't achieve something big, but because they underestimate the power of the small. They think small steps are too boring, too slow, too insignificant. They don't feel satisfying in the moment, so people abandon them. But that's exactly where the magic hides. The small steps are what shape your identity. Every tiny good choice is a vote for the person you want to become. Every small action builds confidence, builds discipline, builds trust in yourself. You can't fake that with dramatic leaps. You can't build consistency by doing something huge once and then burning out. You build consistency by doing something small over and over until it becomes part of who you are. And here's the crazy part. Dramatic leaps almost always come because of the small steps, not instead of them. A person becomes an overnight success after years of invisible small actions. A skill suddenly becomes easy after hundreds of tiny practice sessions. A business suddenly grows after thousands of small improvements nobody noticed. The big breakthrough is simply the moment where all the small steps finally reveal themselves. If you skip the steps, you never get the breakthrough. This is why long-term winners think differently. They don't chase excitement, they chase consistency. They don't focus on how big something is today. They focus on whether they can repeat it tomorrow. They choose actions they can sustain rather than actions that impress people. And because they sustain them, compounding eventually steps in and magnifies everything. Tiny decisions stack up. Daily habits stack up. Repeated behavior stack up. And slowly, quietly, almost secretly, everything begins to transform. The people who chase big leaps usually quit early because they get overwhelmed. They try to change too much too fast. They burn through all their energy at the start and have nothing left for the long journey. But the people who focus on small steps don't burn out because they're not trying to force massive change. They're simply trying to become a little better every day, a little smarter, a little stronger, a little more disciplined. And those little improvements compound into big outcomes without the exhaustion, without the stress, without the pressure. Small steps also give you control. Big leaps often depend on luck, timing, circumstances, and external factors you can't fully control. But small steps, you control those. Today, tomorrow, next week. You control whether you read a page, whether you save $1, whether you take a walk, whether you practice a skill for 10 minutes. You can always choose the small step. And once you realize that, you stop waiting for ideal conditions. You stop waiting for motivation. You stop waiting for the right moment. You just act. And that action gives you momentum, and that momentum triggers compounding. When you finally understand that success doesn't come from giant leaps, but from small steps, repeated long enough to create massive change, everything in your life becomes simpler. You stop rushing. You stop stressing. You stop comparing yourself to others. You stop feeling behind, because now you understand the game. It's not about how quickly you climb. It's about how long you stay climbing. The small steps of the path, the small steps of the progress, the small steps of the transformation. And eventually, those small steps build a life that looks big from the outside, even though it was built quietly, patiently, one tiny step at a time.